Welcome to this a few minutes ago on August 29th. So we are expecting landfall about 12 hours from now. So guys, let's jump right in. And I want to, Jeff Evans, if we could, I want to start with you because people may not know that you actually worked in the Tallahassee area, National Weather Service office there. So you have a little intimate knowledge of that area. What are your thoughts on this storm so far?
Well, I mean, it's a bit of a worst case scenario. When I used to work there, as you mentioned, as a manager in the Tallahassee office, and when we would go around and do exercises, this is the kind of storm we would draw up. You know, a Category 3 or 4 storm making landfall up in Appalachia Bay. It's just a worst case scenario on many fronts. First of all, the we've never had a storm this strong. So this is something that nobody has ever lived through in that part of the country. They've never seen a storm like this, assuming it does bomb out when it hits that warm water is expected tonight and get up to that Category 3 level. Never had a Category 3, 4, or 5 storm make landfall in Appalachia Bay. It's an extremely storm surge prone area. Just the shape of the coastline and how shallow that the bay is. So it's going to be a significant storm surge, really from just north of St. Petersburg all the way around towards Apalachicola. Going to see some record levels of surge. Cedar Key with Hermine in 2016 got up about 6 feet of surge. They're forecasting 12 feet. So I mean, you're looking at you know doubling surge records in some of these areas. Now, fortunately, this is not what we would typically consider a coastal area. I mean, it's not like there's a beachfront and roads that run along it. The coast up there is very tidal, marshy, a lot of fishing camps and homes up on stilts. But 15 feet of water that's going to get in the second level and get up into some of these 10, 12-foot high stilted homes. So quite a bit of damage there we can anticipate. And then the other big factor why it's a worst case scenario is the tree canopy. This is a heavily wooded area of Florida. The joke in Florida was the farther north you got, the more southern it became.
Mhm.
It's much more southern feel to it. A lot of Spanish moss, a lot of canopied roads. It's a beautiful area. But it's going to get put to the test late tonight and tomorrow with these winds coming across. There's going to be a significant amount of trees down. And so a lot of folks that are going to stay behind. The roads are going to be impassable for quite a while. Some of the rural areas are going to be impassable for could be days before they can cut their way out, and they're going to have to prioritize the major thoroughfares and work their way backwards. It's a fast moving storm. The good thing on that is that the it's not going to be a Harvey. It's not going to be a 25-inch rain type of storm. It's going to be a 4 to 8 inch, 12-inch type of rainfall. But that forward movement, especially making landfall in the morning, so it's going to be moving across some of these areas during the peak heating. That's going to enhance the inland wind effects quite a bit. It's with this kind of forward motion, it's going to continue to bring hurricane force winds all the way into, say, Valdosta, and maybe all the way across South Florida to near Savannah, where it makes a second exit there near the coast. So hurricane warnings are in effect across that whole area. I was talking to an emergency manager in Valdosta just before this podcast. We're still friends, and I told him, 80 to 90-mile-an-hour winds with higher gusts is what you're going to see. And your folks have never seen this before.
And
So
Jeff,
folks that think they have seen this, they have not. So that's going to be a big problem. We know we've dealt with that here with multiple storms. Jeff and I have gone around, done a lot of surge surveys, and we hear the same story. This has never happened here. This has never happened here. They didn't comprehend it. So trying to get that message out there, but this is one to watch. This is going to be another historic storm, and depending on how strong it gets, if it gets to a Cat 4 level, let's say, it'll be what, 6 out of 7 years, Cat 4 rapid intensifier in the Gulf right before landfall. So
Yeah.
the trends are they're not good for this storm, and it's really moving into favorable conditions tonight.
Yeah, just the latest update again, just coming out about 10 minutes ago from the National Hurricane Center. Current location 26.9 north, 84.7 west, about 155 miles west southwest of Tampa, Florida, about 400 or 245 miles south of Tallahassee. Maximum sustained winds now at 105 miles per hour. Present movement north at 16, so that's bumped up a couple of miles per hour, I think. And then minimum central pressure dropped again, now down to 965 millibars.
Yeah, and I think the next thing we're going to talk about is the wind. So Jeff, you're kind of, you lived in that area for a long time. You talked about the wind a little bit. What do you think about A, the wind in Tallahassee, and then B, some reference, you mentioned Valdosta, a comparison of how far Valdosta is inland to maybe something around here in Southeast Texas?
So I would say maybe like Conroe,
Okay.
something along that level there. Be the distance, and for Tallahassee itself, I mean that you show the population when you look at this part of Florida. That's the state capital. That's Florida State University, major university. So about a 500,000 people, I believe, in that general area. They're going to look like they're going to be on the west side of the storm. This is going to be very similar to Hermine's track in 2016. Hermine was a Cat 1. We're looking at a Cat 3, so magnitude's higher. But certainly, 80, 100-mile-an-hour winds across a big part of the capital city there. And these aren't thunderstorm winds; these last. So this is going to be several hours. Winds out of the east and then out of the northeast, really, really hammering the capital city there and that whole area. It's going to be rough, and a lot of trees on homes too. So that's going to be a tough one. We ideally you'd want to shelter like you would for a tornado. So tonight, if people in Tallahassee, that whole area, get inside an interior room, especially when those winds start picking up towards middle of the night, towards daybreak, and try to protect yourself from anything from the outside, trees coming down, windows getting blown in if people weren't able to board up their windows. It's going to be something that, again, I don't think folks are totally prepared for it because nobody's lived through this. They haven't had to deal with this before, and it's several generations back haven't had to deal with this. So just because someone's lived there for 50 years doesn't mean this can't happen, because it's about to happen. And forecasts have been talking about this being a major hurricane. And actually, the intensity forecasts have been out ahead of the guidance. The forecasts have been a little bit lower. The Hurricane Center's been out ahead of that and going stronger than a lot of the model tracks. So, there's going to be a big swath, even into Tallahassee, of 100-mile-an-hour winds with some higher gusts. And then obviously there's that added threat of winds with the squalls and even tornadoes when the system comes in.
So I want to go back to this. This is just the kind of uncertainty. You see the hurricane warning outlined in red there. Landing as a major hurricane sometime tomorrow morning, as we just saw the tropical storm. Force winds arriving about 2 a.m. Wednesday morning, tomorrow morning. And then still, notice a hurricane still by 2 p.m. Wednesday in Georgia. Still a tropical storm force winds into South Carolina and North Carolina as late as Thursday afternoon. This thing is moving fast, and there's a lot of trees and a lot of people between where it is now and where it's going to end up Thursday afternoon.
Absolutely.
And the confidence is relatively high at this point in the forecast track.
That's correct. And that's going back to that cone graphic. One thing that we'd like to highlight, and Jeff and we talk about this all the time, is look at those impacts that are going to be outside that cone. So people don't understand what that cone really is showing. That cone is just showing where the center of the storm will most likely track. The impacts are going to be way outside that cone. And that's why you see that hurricane warning extending from near Tampa all the way to, Apalachicola. And then, as you mentioned, tropical storm all the way up into, even north of Savannah and into Charleston area. hurricane, so there's going to be a significant amount of impacts that are not going to be captured by this cone. So that's why we always tell people to be very, very careful of the cone. And when you look at the surge on that dirty side, the east side, it runs all the way down the west coast of Florida, where you're going to have saltwater inundation over dry land, and well outside that cone.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about the surge for a minute because I mean that's going to be the legacy of the storm. It's going to be yes, the winds are going to be bad, the inland winds are going to be bad, but the storm surge is what is going to be a probably historic in here. Just because of the fact they haven't had anything like this in modern times. The closest reference you can probably pull is Superstorm 93, which is magnitudes lower than what we're probably going to be facing up here. And so, Jeff, let's talk a little bit about the nature of storm surge in that Big Bend area of Florida.
Yeah, so I kind of alluded to this kind of in the intro there. You can see how that coastline is formed. It's going to trap. So as water gets pushed up there with those winds, with this the hurricane coming in, especially these really, really intense winds on the east side of it, it's going to shove a lot of water up into northwest Florida. It has nowhere to go. It's getting trapped by that almost basin of the coastline. So that's one major aspect of why this is such a surge-prone area. The other aspect is it gets pretty shallow pretty quickly, and that bay is shallow. So those people don't realize how deep a wave really can be in the ocean. And when you take off that bottom of it, it forces that wave to come up. So that water level is gonna be higher above ground, given that shallow water tendency there in that area as it comes in. Now, one thing, fortunately, is when you have shallow bays like this, you typically don't get those massive waves. There's still going to be fairly significant waves, but the wave action is going to be driven by that wind. It's going to be there. It's going to have that battering effect, but it's not going to be like what you would see in some maybe the east coast of Florida, where you have a really, really deep water shelf right off the coast. The other thing about surge, and again, Jeff and I, we talked to witnesses here in the last few years, that people don't realize is how fast it comes in. They think this is going to be like a tidal rise, and it's going to be over a period of 6 hours. From what we've been told, it goes from ankle deep to chest deep in a matter of like 20 minutes. So it comes in more like a tsunami. And that's how you almost have to think of this, that you need to get out of this tsunami zone, these evacuation areas. People need to take those seriously. And when that water starts, if you didn't leave, you need to get up. You need to get vertical and get out of that water as soon as you can.
Yeah, so some of the values that is being forecast right now, kind of in that eastern side of that Big Bend area of Florida, kind of from Yankeetown northward up to southeast of Tallahassee, is 10 to 15 feet. Now that's 10 to 15 feet above normally dry ground. So if the ground out in front of your house is normally dry, Cedar Key, Keaton Beach, those areas there, we're talking 10 to 15 feet above that. That the top of a first story house is anywhere from 8 to 10 feet tall. So we're talking over the top of a one story house, likely into the second story of elevated structures. And then you do have some wave, maybe not the great big waves that you get sometimes, but you're probably at least going to get 4 or 5 feet
Right.
of wave action potentially. And then the force of that water moving inland, the wind forcing
Yes.
that water, rushing, pushing it inland. And think about that 10 to 15 feet of fast moving water with wave being pushed up against structures.
And that's why they use the term unsurvivable.
Yeah.
Because and as you mentioned, it's like a washing machine. I mean, it's just sloshing forward and back, and you got debris in there being battering against structures that might have been standing, and you start battering it with these waves and winds for a couple hours with debris. It literally is unsurvivable.
So Jeff, you've been down in this area. When we were down with Ian last year in Southwest Florida doing the survey, there's a lot of coastal high-rise condos, hotels, multi-story, so folks could get up above that. I don't get the impression that's what this is here. It's
No, this is not this isn't Destin. This isn't Fort Myers Beach, where you got these beautiful sandy beaches and the big condos, and it's a beach vacation. location. No, this is a fishing area. There really isn't much beach at all. So you don't have those structures to run into. Now, the one advantage is these aren't other than Cedar Key, these aren't barrier islands. So you just have to get inland. But people need to realize, especially along the mouth of the Suwannee River and some of these rivers in there, this surge is going to go well up into those rivers. We've seen that with several storms as well, where that those rivers that dump into the Gulf, it's going to push a lot of water up in there for miles inland. So yeah, people will have to get away from those rivers and drive inland as soon as you can if folks haven't left yet.
But the idea is that you have to leave.
Yes.
There's no structures really that are in this area that you can get to, that you can get high enough. Is kind of what I'm hearing.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
you see videos with hurricane chasers and they want to chase these and they get into these elevated, concrete parking garages. You're not going to find that down there. You're not going to get that right here on the coast. So, I'm assuming a lot of chasers are probably putting cameras and then leaving to go inland because there's not a place where you can ride this out. You couldn't pay me enough money to get anywhere near this purple surge area tonight, tomorrow.
So it sounds like you're kind of describing southern Louisiana, like that area, southwest Louisiana, southern Louisiana. There's homes, there's fishing camps, but there's not big hotels and condos and apartment buildings. And the water is gonna come in and cover all this up and get to really high depths.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
I don't know how many people have ever been to Savannah, but that's kind of more of a vacation spot. So anyone who's been to Savannah, you can visualize kind of what this looks like more. It's just a lot of ossuaries and marshy area, a lot of reeds, and things of that, and just kind of all of a sudden you just get the open ocean out there. But it can go like a mile with just marshiness and it's just like I said, just not a real beachy area. But that this is they've never seen anything like this. So there's just nothing on record to compare this to. This is going to be a historic storm. It is probably going to be known for a massive surge. I hope 15 feet holds it. It'll be interesting to see when they get out there and find out after the fact.
Jeff Evans, what's the road evacuation situation like getting out of there?
So it varies for the area there up at the Big Bend, just southeast of Tallahassee. The evacuation road network is actually quite good. There's quite a few people have homes down there, from St. Mark's around to Alligator Point, around to Apalachicola. There are a lot of clusters of homes. I've seen already on the news a lot of those folks have left and already up into Tallahassee. So that part, the evacuation looks pretty good. The other areas, it's more limited. There's just a few roads that run in and out from the coast area, but fortunately, they're just not very heavily populated. Um, and hopefully a lot of those folks heeded these warnings and have already gotten out. So, it would not take long to get out of there to get to a safe area if folks haven't left. But you're not going to want to wait much longer because these tropical storm force winds and are going to be arriving here sometime after dark.
Yeah, it's about 2 a.m., so just a little over 6 hours from now. So, um, moving on to rainfall, it's a fast-moving storm, so not a big issue. We see the highest rainfall according to this graph between 6 and 10 inches, and that's pretty much where the ice coming in. Most of the areas around that, on the dirty side especially, getting 4 to 6 inches. So that is one positive note from the storm.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and that fast forward motion helps this quite a bit. Now, that being said, this is still 6 to 10 inches over a relatively short period of time. And Tallahassee is an urban area. They have a history with tropical flash floods like we do. You put 3 inches an hour over a lot of concrete, you can't engineer your way out of that. So, flash flooding is certainly going to be a concern, but it's not gonna. That's not what this storm's probably going to be known for. I think the wind and the surge are pretty much going to be what drives the narrative when we look back at another I name, which might likely is going to get retired.
I've seen I know we kind of went through evacuation pretty quick there, but I did see some numbers earlier where it looked like the evacuation compliance was pretty high. And
Yes.
Jeff, I'd like to get your opinion on this. This area a little bit further to the west dealt with Michael back in 18, so over Mexico Beach, and then Southwest Florida dealt with Ian last year. And do you think the recentness of those storms and those images are helping here with this?
They are, and this area, it flooded with a little bit with Ivan. It flooded a little bit with Dennis. Even with, as you mentioned, Michael, there was a pretty significant flooding all around the St. Mark's, Hermine in 2016. So these folks have seen it, and I think that it's enough that it's driven the compliance that they kind of know. I think the images out of Fort Myers Beach and after Laura certainly helped that message as well. But regardless of those storms, this one's going to trump all of those in this area.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, no matter what experience they've had, nobody has experienced what this storm's going to bring.
No, but if even up to 9 feet, like they saw with Dennis and even with Ivan, that caused quite a bit of damage. And as Jeff mentioned, the superstorm in 1993, there in the kind of Taylor and Dixie counties there in the area that's painted purple. They had like 6 fatalities from that surge from that major squall line. They called it the kind of non-named surge, so to speak. Well, then that was, I think, 6 to 8 feet, and there were at the time, a lot of slabbed homes, and people did not realize it, and they died. So they built up. So there is enough history there that I think that that's why we're seeing higher compliance. And we saw that with Laura too. Their Laura had really, really
Yeah.
strong evacuation compliance, and we didn't get the fatalities with that catastrophic surge. And I think just the history with Ike and with all the other storms, Rita, I mean, you name them, that drove catastrophic surge into that part of Louisiana.
So what about Tampa and Tampa Bay? I don't know if folks really understand how vulnerable that major metro area of Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater, Florida is right there. They lucked out big time with Ian last year. Went to the south. They had offshore winds. They had lower tides. It looks like the core of this is going to go far enough north, and then they're still going to get water, and they're still going to get surge up into the bay. But do you want to elaborate a little bit on Tampa and Tampa Bay, and for this case, and also just how vulnerable they are there and how lucky they've been?
Yeah, I mean, that's another narrative that we're going to get here, right? Is that Tampa got missed again,
Mhm.
and it's really not going to help when the one doesn't miss, because people are going to think, oh, they always miss us. They always say they're going to hit us, and they miss us. The early on the Euro was much farther south, north down towards Yankeetown, and so you would have been seeing a lot of that 9, 12, 15 foot type of surge levels into parts of Clearwater Beach, Tampa Bay. That's going to be a catastrophe. Again, they haven't been hit in 100 years. No one's seen this. All this, the whole city's been developed basically since they've really been struck. Um, and then it's a populated area. And so, evacuations are going to be difficult. We know there's a certain percentage that are going to refuse to leave. We see that with every storm. In low populated areas, that's just a few people. High populated areas, like we saw Fort Myers Beach, it might be several thousand. Even those are low percentage of what's normally there. That's still several thousand people put themselves in harm's way. That's the future for Tampa. At some point, it's going to happen. And we're fortunate. They missed it again. This is going to go into a much less populated area. But there's no magic there that's protecting that city and that region. It's one of the cities that the Hurricane Center is most concerned with that are kind of well overdue. And there's some other ones, Jacksonville on the other side of the coast. Heck, you could even argue here in Houston where we're well overdue for something. And Corpus Christi, there are a number of populated areas that have been missed. And unfortunately, I think this is going to add to the narrative. Like, see, they always say they're going to get us, and they don't. This is 2 years in a row now that there was a lot stronger messaging in Tampa early on, and then they kind of backed off as the tracks materialized.
Last year with Ian, we saw water actually getting sucked out of the bay in Tampa for
Right.
a short time.
Low water.
Yeah, right. And how is this storm different from Ian in terms of that? Because this showing 4 to 6 foot storm surge for
Yeah, and
Tampa,
that's
Carolina.
because they're on that dirty side of the storm.
Dirty side, yeah.
On for
Mhm.
Ian, they were on the northwest side of the storm, so all of
Yeah.
that wind was offshore, and significant 100-mile-an-hour winds offshore, and over time it blows that water out. We saw that in our area with Rita,
Mhm.
where Rita made landfall, and we had that strong offshore flow. We had low water conditions in parts of the bay. So yeah, this one's different. They are on the dirty side, so they're still looking at 4 to 6 feet inundation. That's still going to cause some problems.
Mhm.
That's gonna put some water in some homes, into some areas there. So there's gonna be some saltwater flooding in that area, and it still could be dangerous. It could be deadly, even down that area, which is why the surge warning extends as far south as it does. Because we talk about this, but this is all relative. So just because it's not in the bullseye 10 to 15 foot area doesn't mean it's not going to be dangerous outside of those areas. Because when you look at those values, 6 to 9 feet, 4 to 6 feet, that's still quite a bit of salt water over dry land.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, there's always the threat of tornadoes. According to the SBC, of course, this is severe weather, slight risk here, but how far inland would you say the threat exists for tornadoes going into Georgia, South Carolina, and beyond?
So this outlook runs through right around landfall. So if you go to the day 2 outlook, you'll see for tomorrow, but it's going to continue with the center of the storm. Now this one actually gets off the coast, so it moves relatively quickly there. And so you can see where they're highlighting it. Typically, again, it's on the right side of the center. That's where your low level shear is most intense. Just shows that's where the winds set up most favorably, where the instability, which is how volatile the atmosphere is contained in that yellow area there. So tornadoes are going to be a concern for sure. And we've seen storms. Heck, Rita was one that it was the day after landfall, well inland, that we had a bit of a tornado outbreak. And a storm like Ivan, we had 3 or 4 days of tornado outbreaks as that center moved up into the mid-Atlantic. Even tornadoes as far as the DC area 2 days after Ivan's landfall. Now with Idalia here, this one's looks like it's going to move off the coast, so that's going to limit the risk to just a couple of days.
So this is a historic storm. Major Hurricane Cat 3 has never entered Appalachia Bay in recorded history.
Yeah, I mean, there's no historic record in this part of Florida. This is this part of Florida, the Jacksonville area, the Georgia coast are two kind of areas that, just because of their location, where they're located, because of the concavity shape of the coast, they don't jut out like South Florida, Southeast Louisiana, or North Carolina. It's rare to get storms into these areas. And if you think about where this is in the Gulf of Mexico, the majority of our storms move from east to west or southeast to northwest. And so that is not a favorable track to get a storm in here. But something coming up from the Western Caribbean going due north, or something coming out of the Southern Gulf and moving northeast is really the only way you kind of get it. And if you look at the area of this, it's relatively small. And so to get that track that comes up just perfect is really a rare occurrence. And it just hadn't happened since the 1850s or so, since we have reliable records going back now. It certainly has been possible before. One thing I'd like to ask Jeff, this is late August, and does this track, to me, is much more something you'd see in late September or October.
Right.
You get the Western Caribbean that's getting pulled up to the northeast quickly ahead of a trough and all that kind of stuff. a little bit rare, I guess, for late August. I mean, it happens, but
Well, yeah, and I think that's why they typically don't get major hurricanes in here because typically at this point we're a little bit later in the season. The water's still not this warm, and with the shear, they don't get Cat 3. They begin weakening as they make landfall as they approach to this part of Florida typically. So, what might have been a Cat 3 like Alina or another storm back in the 80s or Kate in 1985 was strong too, ends up making landfall barely as a one. They weaken as they come in. But this is an unusual summer. It's an unusual pattern that we've been dealing with. And the water temperatures, this part of Florida has been dealing with similar heat and drought conditions that we have, not quite as extreme, but still pretty extreme. So that's why this is like a bath water up here in the bay, which is why we think this storm is going to intensify so much. But Jeff is right. Typically this time of year, it's hard to get a pattern to bring one up into like this into this part of Florida. Usually, they're going to track more west northwest across the Gulf and then impact, over near New Orleans or Mobile. I mean, that's that typical track coming out of the Caribbean or even over towards us. To see one curve this much and then to curve this much and then to maintain this kind of intensity and to strengthen the way it is, very, very rare, which is why we've never seen it before.
So one question I've been, asked both with Harold, the last weekend, and now this storm is, how much of it is Gulf water temperatures? How much of, we all know the Gulf is very warm this year, and how much of that is playing into it? And Jeff, I'll have you comment on this in a second, but one thing I'll say is this system has been sitting over the Northwest Caribbean for, 2 days. It was meandering down there over very, very warm water. And it was still only a tropical storm. It was kind of in its formative stages and all that. And so, even though the Gulf is very warm, the potential is very high, and we're going to realize that potential here. There's more that goes into these things and their intensification than just the water temperature. And if you don't have the right conditions aloft and you don't have moisture and you don't have low wind shear, it's very difficult for these storms to get together. That's what we saw with this system earlier. Now we have the water temperatures and a favorable upper air and moisture environment, and that's what's really resulting in this going. And so just the water temperatures alone are just one piece of that puzzle. And so yes, it adds to it, and yes, there's a lot of fuel, but everything else has to line up too, right?
They have to
Absolutely. I mean, it's similar in a lot of ways with a lot of big storms. Be it why we don't get major historic blizzards, why we don't get major historic tornadoes all the time. The ingredients have to be in place. They're hard to get all of that together at the same time. Um, but in this case, as Jeff said, this thing meandered down there off Cozumel and Yucatan for several days. And it just finally got going. And now with these water temperatures, maybe instead of being a high-end Cat 1 or Cat 2, now we're looking at a Cat 3 because all of those other things came together. They put this storm in place and it's moving over now. Really, really favorable warm water.
So we touched on the population of Florida earlier. This is creditreddit.com, just a graphic of the counties in Florida, over 2 million, obviously the Miami area with the most population, but this storm moving in around this area right here. And if you're gonna have a storm hit Florida, in terms of population and structures and things like that, that's the least populated area.
No, there's no doubt. But on the flip side, you have a tree canopy that hasn't been tested by anything like this. So it's the vegetative up there it's been thriving for 100 or more years and never really been put through what it's about to get put through. And we saw that with Michael as well, farther west, Panama City and up into far southwest Georgia, where it was just like a lawnmower. People have a hard time comprehending what this tree damage is going to look like well up into at least south central, if not parts of southeast Georgia.
Indeed. Well, guys, got guess we'll wrap up this edition of Weather Insights. Any final thoughts?
Hopefully, we're going to see this tomorrow. You're going to see. I don't know how much we're actually going to see tomorrow because I don't think there's going to be a lot of people down there on the coast. It's not going to be like Ian, and so you'll see some inland reporting and stuff like that. But I think most of the TV folks are probably going to pull back off the coast because there's nothing there that you can safely do this in. And then we'll see. It's probably going to be Thursday or Friday before we get overhead images of what it looks like down there. And again, hopefully the evacuation compliance is there. Hopefully people don't stay. Jeff and we know from doing these surveys in the past, there is that segment that they're not going to leave, and there's nothing that we can say, that really anybody can say, to get them out of there. But hopefully that's relatively small, and it looks good. What I've seen today, the compliance numbers around Cedar Key and that we're upwards of the upper 90s. I mean, that's almost unheard of in hurricane evacuation. And so if that's the case, hopefully, fingers crossed, we're going to get this big historic surge, but no loss of life. And then, of course, the inland wind impact, the loss of power, and all that, and those will be the legacies of this storm.
Yeah, just keep those people in your thoughts and prayers for the next 24 hours. They're really going to go through a lot. I don't think, as I mentioned, people can comprehend the kind of tree damage that they're going to be going through. It's going to be a rebuild that's going to be in the weeks, if not months, for a big part of this area. A lot of people will be without power for quite a while, so keep thinking of them. Lastly, one thing that we have seen recently with several of these major hurricanes are we have more people die after the storm than during the storm, and so people need to be very, very careful with their own limitations. Understand you can't go back into air conditioning if you're going to be out working and trying to clear tree limbs and cutting trees, off your driveway and such. And in understanding how to work a generator and make sure your generators are outside and not put into home. So, that's going to be the next message the emergency management is going to be having to really push out in that area is, don't be one of these statistics after the storm where you die from a secondary cause. Because it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of uncomfortableness. It's still late August. Just think of how hot it's been. Can you imagine not having power for a couple of weeks? You might get by a day or so, but it starts wearing on you after a few days, and it really, really builds. And then lastly, it's depression and different things. People have lost everything. That's another cause of a lot of injuries after the storm, and a lot of mental well-being and angst after these storms. So just keep these folks in your prayers. They're going to need it. It's going to be a long 24 hours, if not a long couple weeks.
Yeah. Quick recovery, and our best wishes for those in Florida. Guys, thanks for joining.
Thanks. Have a good night, guys.